The fan above whirred slowly, its blades coated with dust, barely moving the warm air that hung heavy in the small room. Outside, the evening light was fading, leaving streaks of orange across the cracked window pane. A boy sat on a wooden chair that creaked under his weight, bent over a stack of books. His name was Bilal. The glow of a small desk lamp painted half his face in gold, the other half lost in shadow. His eyes moved from line to line, but his mind was far from the words printed on the page. He could still hear the faint sound of his mother coughing in the next room, the way she tried to hide it whenever he looked up. He knew she was tired. She worked long hours cleaning offices in the city so he could attend school. Every coin she saved, every meal she skipped, it was all for his education. Bilal understood that, and that's why failure was something he couldn't afford, not even once. Each morning, he left home before sunrise, walking 2 miles to the bus stop with an old backpack slung over his shoulder. The bus was crowded, filled with the scent of dust, sweat, and old leather seats. He'd squeeze in, holding his books tightly against his chest. On good days, he found a corner to stand where no one pushed him too hard. On bad days, he'd hang by the door, praying not to fall as the bus swayed through potholes and traffic. By the time he reached school, his uniform would be wrinkled, his shoes covered in dust, but his eyes would still shine with purpose. His teachers often noticed his silence. He wasn't one of the talkative ones, nor was he among the confident few who answered every question without hesitation. Bilal spoke little, listened much, and worked harder than anyone else in that classroom. But no matter how hard he tried, the world always seemed a few steps ahead. His classmates had laptops, private tutors, and homes where silence meant comfort. For him, silence meant worry. About money, about rent, about whether there would be food that night. He studied under candlelight when the power went out, the wax dripping slowly onto his notebook. Sometimes he used to imagine that the melted wax were the hours he lost, the moments he'd never get back. Exams were the hardest, not because of the questions, but because of the fear. He'd sit there, heart pounding, the sound of the ticking clock louder than his thoughts. He knew every mark mattered. One mistake, one careless error could mean repeating the year. And he couldn't, not when his mother had already sacrificed so much. During lunch breaks, while others went to the canteen laughing, he'd stay behind in class, eating a piece of flatbread from his lunchbox. Some days he shared half with a friend who had even less. They never spoke about hunger. It was an unspoken truth between them, something understood but never said aloud. At home, the evenings felt longer. His mother would ask how his day went, and he'd always smile, saying, "It was good." He never told her about the teasing, how some boys called him poor genius, or how they laughed when he couldn't join them for outings. He didn't want her to feel guilty for things beyond her control. She already carried enough burdens. When winter came, studying became even harder. The cold seeped through the cracks in the wall, and his fingers turned numb holding the pen. His only sweater was patched at the elbows, a gift from his uncle last year. Still, he didn't complain. He used to say to himself, "If I stop now, everything she did will mean nothing." Those words became his prayer, whispered into the night whenever he felt too tired to continue. There were times when he thought of quitting. Once, after failing a math test despite studying all night, he sat on the roof staring at the city lights. They looked like a million tiny promises, shining for others, not for him. He wondered if success was something you earned or something you were born into. The thought hurt him more than he could admit. One day, a teacher noticed his quiet struggle. She called him after class and asked if everything was okay. He nodded, avoiding her eyes. But she saw the worn-out shoes, the faint ink stains on his hands, the exhaustion behind his forced smile. The next week, she gave him an extra set of notebooks and a small lamp she said she didn't need anymore. Bilal didn't know how to thank her. He simply said, "I'll make sure this isn't wasted." And he meant it. The months passed and final exams approached. The pressure grew heavier, like a storm cloud that refused to move. At night, when his mother fell asleep, he'd sit by the window whispering the formulas he memorized, the essays he wrote, the dreams he refused to abandon. The city outside slept peacefully, but his mind was wide awake, burning with hope and fear. The day of the results came with a gray sky and cold air. Students gathered near the notice board, laughter and nerves mixing in the air. Bilal stood at the edge of the crowd, afraid to move closer. He watched as others shouted in joy, some in disappointment. Finally, he stepped forward, searching for his roll number. His fingers trembled as he scanned the list. And then he found it. His name, his number. Next to it, a grade that made him blink twice to believe he had passed. Not just passed. He was among the top 5 in his class. For a moment, everything around him went silent. The noise, the crowd, the chatter all faded. He looked at the paper again as if afraid it would disappear. Then a tear rolled down his cheek, followed by a smile he couldn't control. When he reached home, his mother was waiting by the door. She saw his face before he said a word. Her eyes filled with tears, the kind that carried years of struggle and pride. They didn't need words. That evening, they shared a simple meal, laughing quietly as if the world had suddenly grown lighter. But Bilal knew this was only the beginning. The road ahead, college, expenses, competition, would be even harder. Yet for the first time he believed that maybe he could survive it. That maybe the dreams of a boy from a small house with cracked walls could still reach the stars. The first day of college felt like stepping into another world. The gates were wide, the buildings tall, and the students moved in groups, laughing, dressed in neat clothes with branded bags and phones in hand. Bilal walked through them quietly, his old backpack hanging from one shoulder, his eyes full of wonder and nerves. Everything here felt faster, louder, brighter, and he felt small. He found his classroom and sat at the back. The walls were painted clean, the benches smooth, the ceiling fans newer than any he'd seen before. But what caught his attention were the faces, confident, relaxed, as if everyone here belonged. He looked down at his shoes, remembering the mud roads of his village, the nights under candlelight. He had made it this far, but the question now whispered in his mind. Could he keep going? College life was not what he expected. There were lectures he couldn't always follow, references to books he didn't have, and projects that required laptops and internet access he could barely afford. While others stayed up late discussing ideas in cafes, he worked evenings in a small bookstore, arranging shelves, dusting covers, and saving every rupee for fees and transport. The owner liked him, a quiet, hard-working boy who read more than he sold. Sometimes when the shop was empty, Bilal would stand between the rows of books, running his fingers along the spines, imagining the stories waiting to be known. At home, life hadn't changed much. His mother still worked long hours, though her hands had grown weaker. They lived in the same small space, now with a broken window that let in the winter air. Bilal tried to fix it with cardboard, but the cold always found a way in. On nights when he came home from the bookstore exhausted, he'd find her asleep, in the corner, a thin blanket over her shoulders, her face peaceful despite everything. It was that sight that pushed him to open his books again, no matter how late it was. There were days when fatigue was heavier than hunger, when his mind refused to focus, when the words blurred on the page. He'd sit there, head in his hands, thinking of how easy it would be to give up. But giving up to him wasn't an option. It was betrayal. To his mother, to the boy he once was, studying under candlelight, to every sacrifice made in silence. One day, a professor called him after class. He asked about Bilal's plans, about his life. When Bilal hesitated, embarrassed to talk about his struggles, the professor simply smiled and said, "I see it in your eyes. You're not afraid of hard work. Don't let the noise around you make you doubt your worth." Those words stayed, with him, echoing quietly in his mind whenever things got too hard. As months turned into semesters, the pressure grew. There were assignments, presentations, deadlines, and then the unspoken battles, loneliness, anxiety, the constant fear of falling behind. His classmates talked about weekend trips and new gadgets. He talked about part-time shifts and tuition dues. Sometimes he envied them, and then immediately felt guilty for it. His phone was old, cracked on one corner. He used it carefully, only turning on mobile data when necessary. During group projects, he'd often stay silent, letting others take the lead, afraid they'd notice his limitations. Yet when it came to writing reports or doing research, he always gave his best. Slowly, some classmates began to notice. They started including him more, asking for his help, respecting his quiet intelligence. Still, not everything was kind. There were whispers, small jokes about his clothes or his lack of style. He laughed them off, but each one left a small mark. The city had taught him how cruel casual words could be. Sometimes he'd go to the rooftop of the hostel, sit, alone, and watch the lights of the city, endless, glittering, unreachable. He'd think of home, of the quiet fields, of his mother's soft voice telling him, "You can do anything if you keep faith." That memory always felt like a small flame in the dark. By the time final year began, things grew heavier. His mother's health worsened. The doctor said she needed rest, but rest was something they couldn't afford. Bilal started working extra shifts at the bookstore and tutoring 2 school children in the evenings. His days blurred into a loop: classes, work, study, repeat. He'd come home late, eat whatever was left, then study till dawn. Sleep became a luxury. One night, as he sat by his mother's bed, she woke up and whispered, "You're tired, my son." He smiled, hiding his trembling hands. "Just a little, Ami. It'll all be fine soon." She looked at him with tired eyes and said, "You already made me proud." It was a simple sentence, but it broke something inside him, a wall he had built for years to keep his emotions contained. He turned away so she wouldn't see the tears. The next morning he went to class half asleep, but his mind kept replaying her words. He realized that pride wasn't about success, it was about effort, and he had given everything he could. During his final exams, the pressure reached its peak. His mind was foggy from sleepless nights. On the last paper, halfway through, his pen slipped from his fingers. For a moment, everything went black. When he opened his eyes, he was in the infirmary. The nurse said he had fainted from exhaustion. He lay there for hours, staring at the ceiling, thinking about how far he'd come and how fragile he still felt. When results were announced, he didn't rush to check them. He went to work, completed his shift, and then walked to the college notice board. His hands shook as he searched for his roll number again, like that day years ago. And there it was, next to his name, the word distinction. He stood there silently, his lips trembling into a smile he couldn't hold back. It wasn't joy. It was relief. A deep exhale after years of holding his breath. He walked home that evening under a sky painted pink and gold, the world around him alive and unfamiliar. His mother was sitting by the door, waiting as always. When he told her, she closed her eyes, whispering a prayer of gratitude. That night, they ate together in silence. The food tasted the same, but everything felt different. The air was lighter, the world kinder. For the first time in years, Bilal slept without worry. Months later, he got a job. Not big, not glamorous, but enough. Enough to move his mother to a better place. Enough to buy her medicine without hesitation. On his first paycheck, he bought her a warm shawl. When he placed it over her shoulders, she smiled and said softly, "See? I told you. You could do anything." Now, when Bilal passes by his old college on his way to work, he sometimes sees new students walking in, eyes full of dreams and fear. He remembers himself in them, the boy who thought the world was too big, too far. And he wishes he could tell them that it's okay to struggle. That sometimes, the nights that break you are the ones that build you. He still studies, still learns, not for grades or degrees, but for life. Because somewhere deep down, he knows, education was never just about books. It was about endurance, about patience, about finding light when everything around you is dark. And every time he looks at his mother, sitting by the window with her quiet smile, he realizes that her faith was the bridge that carried him across every hardship. He didn't just survive those years, he transformed them into something greater, a story of love, grit, and the silent power of never giving up.